And welcome to the Beyond the Dollar Signs podcast with your host, Mark Taylan. Mark, today's topic is interesting because, well, you do a lot of retirement planning, but you just recently held 8 dinner workshops and talked to people about how to retire, how to prepare to retire. And I know from talking with you before we started the show, you uncovered some things that I think were a little bit unexpected for you in talking with these people and in making presentations to them. It's good to be with you. Why don't you tell us about that and what you've learned?
Hi, Bill. It's good to see you. Yeah, my team and I were on a whirlwind the last few months, and we had 8 dinner workshops, and we're in front of about 200 clients and families that were interested in the topic of retirement planning. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting because it was the first time that my team and I have done these type of workshops, and we weren't sure what the interest was going to be. And initially it was going to be 4 workshops, and it was so overbooked we ended up doing 8. Wow! And so it was a fantastic audience. They were very engaged, but what we discovered was I was really surprised that many people had not done really the basics of financial planning. And in fact, many people that we met with after the dinner workshops and even during the dinner workshops had been given a lot of fragmented advice. And what I mean by that is, we would look at their portfolios and ask them, what was the basis of this investment? Where does this make, how did you come to the realization that this made sense? And, it was interesting. It was just like a product, they were given a solution to a problem, but not really a comprehensive financial plan that addressed all their needs, right? Because, as you get closer to, as you're planning for retirement, you start to accumulate assets. And a lot of them had assets that, we just had a hard time understanding, like what was the basis of those recommendations.
So when you sit down with clients, it kind of begs the question, and you look at that, what's your advice, or how do you start helping people prepare so that they can retire with some financial freedom and obviously a whole lot less worry?
That financial freedom is come up a lot in recent conversations. I always ask clients, what does money mean to them, right? And at the end of the day, it sounds cliche, but financial freedom was what it came down to give them the options. So our process is, we have a process that we've developed over 2 decades. It's called the Wealth Path, and we go through a process in different steps to help understand, number one, where a client sits today, what are the assets they've accumulated, what structures they have in place. And then and that asset map really is, if you think about it, it's a 1-page overview of a client's full financial profile. And it allows us to really understand all the different pieces on 1 page. We'll look at assets, liabilities, their different income streams, all of those things on 1 page, so we can have really more meaningful discussions about, how does this investment property translate into your whole retirement plan? How does this Social Security that you're going to draw, what is that? How does that play into this whole retirement picture?
So you take an assessment of their assets, what they have, right, and identify sources of income and and investments that have been made. Mm-hmm. Where do you go from there?
The next part really then is doing a really detailed expense process, right? And number one is, we really want to understand what your base household expenses are, and then what are your lifestyle expenses, right? Because I think those are 2 different things, right? People say, yep, I need about $7,000 a month. And then I do a deep dive in the expenses and say, oh, great, you've got utilities, insurance. Oh, wow, you've really thought about, you've really broken down all these household expenses. But what about the things that you do? Do you golf? Do you travel? What about birthdays and holidays? Those are lifestyle expenses that you need to be realistic about. It's not just your household expenses, but we
Yeah.
need to understand the detailed expenses. And then when it comes to retirement, what are the expenses going to be then? Maybe a mortgage gets paid off. We start to account for a lot of different things. What about, tell me about your cars. When's the last time you bought a car? Do you think in a 20-year, 30-year retirement that you're going to need a new car, a new roof? Do you have children? Are there weddings to pay for? Those are really big expenses that we really need to account for. In addition to that, what about the risk of healthcare and long-term care?
Mm.
So there's a lot of different things that in that expense process to really help a client understand, what do they spend now? What do they think they're going to spend in retirement? And what do we know of from our experience, expenses that are going to come up that that they're not accounting for?
Yeah. Because the goal here is to retire with financial freedom, not
Right.
financial handcuffs, right?
Very important. Yes. That's the thing is that clients, sometimes somebody will say, well, I'm not going to live that long. And I say to them, well, what if you do?
What if you do?
What if you do? I had this great conversation today, this past weekend with a couple. And I said, one of the husband was very adamant. He said, I've always planned for this. I've had a plan in place. And the other client was like, my family didn't live that long, or they spent like there was no tomorrow. And, I think, hearing this story, and it was really enlightening again, as a validation of, you really do need to plan, because you don't know what the future holds. And 20 years down the line, you're not going to have the same options as you are today, that you don't have the option to just go back into the workforce. It's much more difficult in your 70s to go back to work and get a job that's comparable to what you're, getting paid before. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It is so true. And, I think that one of the expenses that people don't think about, talking about, weighing expenses, everybody thinks, oh, got to worry about healthcare and what's my Medicare going to cost me, and what is this going to cost me? I wager you pretty good money most people don't think about how often they go out to eat, because they spend that money now and there's like no consequence now. And it may only be once a week.
Sure.
But I don't think people like register that. Oh, wait, you know what? We spend like, man, we do takeout, and we probably do like maybe $100 a month in takeout, but that's not in the expenses. So it's going to put a crimp in things if you don't recognize it.
The other thing is, in retirement, I always think of this in my mind. Every day is a Sunday, right? Or a weekend. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
What do you normally do on weekends? I know I do. I've had a long week, and I want to take the family out. I don't want to cook dinner, and I want to do things. And so, you have to be really realistic about, what is your lifestyle going to be like? How often do you like to go out to eat? It's something.
Go to a live show.
There you go.
Go to see music, right?
Right.
Or hey, vacation. I realize that retirement for a lot of people is like permanent vacation, but what if you want to travel? What if you want to go somewhere?
Exactly right. And a lot of clients, we do that. We sit down, and so we go through a financial planning process once we've understood the expenses and we've discussed what we call an asset map. And through that process, when we're identifying goals, it's exactly that. We find in the first 10 years is when most people are going to travel the most, because, they're healthier in that first 10 years. They're looking for things to replace the work, maybe the work grind that they've had. And so we account for an expense to travel, especially in the first 10 years. And we run that in the financial plan. And so there are really 6 factors when we're running financial planning that we look at. I think number 1 is longevity. How long is this retirement going to be? I was talking with a client over the weekend, and late 50s, and the projection for life expectancy was 94. And she said, wow, that's a long time to be in retirement. And I said, it certainly is. Imagine what you're going to do in this next, 25 years, 27 years of your life. What does that look like for you? Um, so it's a lot of time to plan for. It's a lot that longevity risk. And the longer you live, the higher the chances that you're going to have a long-term care event. So, I mean, we have to really factor that in. And in today's financial plans, I always run a scenario where I show them this is that long-term care event. This is that 3 to 4 year period. And this is what that expense looks like. Right. So that's one of the big modules we talk about. We also go into stock market risk, survivorship when one of the spouses passes, because usually there's a loss in income. You also have to look at inflation. We've had a lot of inflation most recently. How does that impact, your purchasing power? Everybody's concerned about taxes these days, and especially with the downgrade of the U.S. and the debt, many people think tax rates are going up, right? And so there are all these factors in the financial planning process, which kind of brings us back to once you have an understanding of all of that, then how do you utilize the assets that you accumulated to address those things, right? I mean, and so we go back to the asset map and say, well, here's how we would position these assets to account for that long-term care scenario. Here's how you take assets that you've accumulated in growth mode and turn them into income, right? So those are the things that through a very comprehensive process that we go through is we're able to come back to clients and say, here's our recommendation, but it's based on a process that we went through together to identify all the goals and the risk and so forth to get you to where you need to be. And we can show you the path. And I think that is our biggest value prop, is to do that process with clients. And then so that way they have confidence in knowing that these are decisions that, we need to make to help us reach financial freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where does legacy fit in all this, Mark? I think some people think about, but they want to leave something behind, or they want to leave something for their kids or their grandkids or whatever. How does that fit into all of this planning?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think it's really important. It's one of the things that I ask clients is there a certain amount of money that you want to leave to your children or to somebody, a foundation? Is there something that's really dear to your heart that you want to make sure that you're allocating assets for? And it's mixed. Recently, most clients say, my children are fine, they're doing well. We want to make sure that we're covered first. And if there's anything left, maybe the house, that's what they'll have, right? And so, that tends to be the thought process for maybe newly retired or people that are thinking about retirement. However, what I have found is my clients that have hit their stride in retirement and 10, 15, 20 years down the line, they've realized that, hey, we're not going to run out of money. We've addressed every risk possible, and we're more conservative in our portfolios. We've got the long-term care piece. The income is great. We're not traveling. We know what our spend is. From a legacy standpoint, then, that's when we start to think, really, that's when the conversation often comes to me saying, how do we pass these assets efficiently to our children and grandchildren? And that's where that planning comes in. Maybe it's gifting, maybe it's, different options to do that.
Yeah.
So certainly. Yeah.
But you walk it through with them so that they understand what their options are going to be.
Yeah, what I find is later in life, once you've gone through that, you've been retired for a while, you start to realize, like, I'm going to make it, and how can I pass this wealth to, I don't want to give it to the government in taxes. I want my children to have it. And so it's so gratifying, I think, for clients when they tell me, I'd rather give it to them now, Mark, than when I pass. I want to see my children enjoy this money, and my grandchildren. And it's great to see my clients that have done that and the impact it makes to the next generations.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is really great. I want to go all the way back to the beginning here for a second, and it strikes me as a good way maybe to come to the end of this particular episode. I was intrigued by what you learned in terms of people getting fragmented advice.
Mhm.
That sounds like these well-meaning, intelligent people probably aren't working with financial planner. They may have gotten a piece here or a piece there, or you talk to somebody and you talk to another person. And I would think when you're looking at stuff, in fact, I know this from personal experience, when you're looking at this kind of moment and these kind of decisions, it's really good to have somebody that you're working with, isn't it? I realize you're a financial planner, but
Mhm.
that's your purpose in life. That's what you're here for, to help people do exactly what we've been talking about.
Right. Yeah, I think what we discovered is, some financial advisors, and it's a very loose term, I think, in the industry. Some
Mm.
are focused in their particular lane, meaning that maybe they're insurance based. So you're going to get an insurance based solution
Uh,
versus somebody maybe at a Wall Street firm like a Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch. They're going to be more securities based and solutions. At our firm, we're both insurance, securities, real estate license. So, we kind of look at it from all those different angles and can
yeah.
give you kind of holistic advice. And so that's what we try to do, right? Our goal is to really advise on the big picture from a lot of different aspects. It wasn't to say that the advice they got was bad, but it wasn't comprehensive. It was kind of in a box, like this addresses this risk, but that's it. How do you fit all these pieces of the puzzle together?
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody who's listening to this podcast is struck by our conversation and maybe wants to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you to have an initial conversation?
You know what? We have what's called a calendar app where you can book an appointment, a 20-minute consultation by Zoom or by phone, which I find is a great way to do an introduction.
Mm.
We do financial planning two ways. We do it as a flat fee as well. So for a lot of times when financial advisors meet with clients, a lot of times what I hear is, oh, they just want to manage my money, right? And so, that's part of it. Part of it is asset management. We have private wealth clients that we do the whole comprehensive thing where we manage
Yeah.
assets and we help with legacy and do the planning. But we also do financial planning as a flat fee, meaning that we'll take the time to do the analysis with them and just charge a flat fee. And then they can take that plan and meet with us on a hourly basis going forward. So, we really want to help clients. That process does take us some time. So it's about a 20-hour process that we've determined it takes us to really understand clients, put it together, and then present and review. But basically, they can take a fully comprehensive plan and execute on their own and then come and see us as needed. That's one option.
And the other, obviously, is a more involved option where you sit down and you actually work with you and go over what you have, right?
That's right. We meet on a regular basis, at least once a quarter, and we're helping them execute and make adjustments to the plan as we go through retirement. So, yeah.
And you do it, and you do that there is a fee attached to that, obviously, because this is your business.
Right.
But it's not. I would imagine it's not is it a transactional fee, or are you acting as a fiduciary here and charging a fee based on the amount of assets held?
That's a great question. Yeah, we're a licensed fiduciary. We're a fee-based firm, so we'll both do asset management as well as some insurance pieces as well that complement that. So some of the assets we will charge an advisory fee on those
Mm-hmm.
that for our private wealth clients, and that's really it. Once they're part of that private wealth family, that they get charged an advisory fee, and that's everything's really included. We become their trusted advisors. Often the clients call us for everything. I've had clients call me for things like, validation on should I sell my car, or,
Yeah.
just advice. I'm transitioning from one job to another. What are your thoughts on this? And so, we love to be that resource for a client, and we're certainly, feel amazed that they would come to us with all questions in life and finance.
It's great, though. It's great to have an expert in that area in your life. I mean, it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. So you mentioned the calendar app, but remind us again the best way to schedule an initial no obligation conversation with you. How do people do it?
Well, in the show notes, there'll be a link to our calendar app, and they can schedule a 20-minute consultation by phone or by Zoom. That's probably the best way. You can also reach out to us by phone or email as well. And we certainly would love to have a discussion with you and see how we can help.
That's fantastic. The other thing you could do if you're listening to this podcast and you're not a subscriber yet, hit subscribe, follow. That way, when Mark drops new episodes, you're notified. You can give them listens, just like you gave this one a listen. And I would ask that if you like the podcast, tell people about it. Word of promotion, that'd be great. Give it a good rating. Let people know what you listen to. We would very much appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Mark and everybody at 360 Advisors, thank you for taking the time to listen today. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Dollar Signs, Financial Clarity. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.advisors360pwm.com or give us a call at 408-778-8280. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Advisors 360. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.